Christian Blower, welcome. You're the Acting General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers, a job you stepped up to after the sudden and tragic death of Steve Sinnot last April. Before that, you were Deputy General Secretary of the Union. You grew up, I think, in Kingston upon Thames when you went to school, and then you became a modern foreign languages teacher in various London comprehensives. First of all, can I take you back to those school days in Kingston upon Thames? What sort of schooling did you have, and had that influenced your views of education?
Well, certainly my schooling did influence me. I went to a primary school in Chessington, quite close to the zoo. My father died when I was 9, so I was brought up in a single-parent family. My mother was very, very deeply committed to education, and notwithstanding the fact that we didn't have a great deal of spare cash, my mother saved up to buy a bottle of sherry for my teaching staff every Christmas. And that instilled in me a sense that she thought that teachers were really important.
I think it was a selective school system in Kingston then, as it is indeed now. Did that influence your views as well?
I'd passed the 11 plus on an interview. It's a very curious system, really. And lots of kids passed the 11 plus and passed on the interview. And so I went into the grammar stream of the bilateral school at Tolls Girls. For my part, I would like the system to be rid of selection completely. And as we say in all of our materials, I would like a good local school for every child in every community.
What from your classroom experience do you think shapes the way you look at things now, leading the large teachers' union?
The relationship between teachers and students is really what cemented me knowing that that teaching was really a wonderful job, because on a day-to-day basis there is just so much that you can do for individual students. Of course, it doesn't always have the entirely positive outcome you would like. I mean, I remember I was once visiting a flat with a friend of mine. The young man who owned the flat was sitting in the flat watching the TV, and he looked up and he went, "Oh, you're Miss Blower, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "You taught me French." I said, "Oh, did I?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I went to Paris last year. I'll tell you what, it didn't work."
Oh dear.
So, but on the other hand, I have also taught, young people who've gone on to do modern foreign languages at university. So, there's a variety of experiences.
Now, of course, you're a very different role in education as Acting General Secretary. Why did you make that shift, if you like, from being a classroom teacher to being at the head of a union? I mean, you were Deputy General Secretary before, you've been President as well. Yeah. Why did you make that shift?
Well, I suppose I'd seen it as a kind of continuation of the things that I'd always done, really, because I'm a career-long member of the NUT, never been in another union, always been active in the NUT, and had been active locally as a secretary, so involved in the union all the time. And of course, being General Secretary of a trade union is an elected position rather than something, for which you go through the normal, if you like, appointments procedure. So I just saw it as a way of continuing the kind of activism that I always thought was important. It was more, there are more opportunities in the NUT to do the kinds of things that I've always wanted to do. And I am, once I get into classrooms, an inveterate interferer. I just love to go and ask kids what they're doing and, check their work and things.
You don't go picking up the litter in the classrooms, do you?
I have been known to do that. I
don't know any teacher who's been cured of that habit. I mean, obviously being a union leader is a very political role, not necessarily with a capital P, but political with a small p. Where would you say you stand on the political spectrum, and where do you want to sort of guide the NUT towards?
Well, in the party political sense, of course, the NUT is obviously not affiliated to any party, but also a pretty broad church. We have members of quite a lot of the major parties in membership. I think the values of the union are about social justice and fairness. They're about the value of public service and not private profit. They're about education being an absolute human right. And I guess they are probably left of centre types of views. But they're also the views to which all of our members, from whatever section of the political spectrum they come, they all subscribe to those views because they run so deeply through the NUT. So that's pretty much where I place myself.
I mean, you've very much emphasised the non-party political role, and I have to ask you about this because, as you know, you've been dubbed in one or two newspapers as part of the, quotes, loony left, and of course you did stand for the London Assembly as part of the London Socialist Alliance.
I did, yeah.
So, I mean, again, where does that put you politically? I mean, socialist, is that a label you're happy with, or was that just a sort of a convenience because you wanted to stand and that was the umbrella that worked out best?
Well, of course, even when I stood in London, I didn't stand as anything other than an activist in the NUT. There wasn't a kind of particular party affiliation there. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to go with socialism in the sense that I think that is about all of the things that the Labour Party has, for example, traditionally stood for, which are those values of public service, wanting to maintain the National Health Service, making sure that we really do have a good education for every children. So if that's what socialism means, that's fine. It's the parliamentary road.
I think one of your predecessors described you as to the left of old Labour. Was that fair or not?
Well, of course, no one really knows where old Labour is anymore. I mean, I'd be very pleased if old Labour were more to the fore now, and I'd probably find myself somewhere in there. Although, of course, I'm bound to say, that there are elements of policies, even from the other parties, to which we can subscribe, although not everything. And, of course, there are elements of current Labour Party policy to which we cannot. So it is a quite an interesting field.
OK, I want to look ahead now to one of the big things that's coming up for you, really, and that, of course, is what's going to happen on pay. In recent weeks and months, actually, things have changed. We now look as if we're heading to what could be a recession. Isn't there a risk now that if you were to go ahead with industrial action, that will alienate parents, many of whom will say, well, I wish we had a nice, secure job as teachers do?
Well, of course, there are always, checks and balances and risks to be weighed up when you embark on any strategy that involves industrial action. And we will be mindful of that. But as I'm speaking to you today, we absolutely believe that the case is justified on the basis that teachers' pay has gone down over such a long period of time, on the basis that we really need more people to come in, on the basis, for example, that our younger members are having to pay back their student loan at over 4%, but their salary is only going up at 2.45%. You must bear in mind that many of those younger members accrued additional debt so that they could become teachers. So that's a very poor way, really, to repay them. So there are absolutely clear reasons why it's completely justifiable for us to be balloting.
How effective, though, do you think action would be? I mean, bearing in mind you had a one-day strike earlier in the year, but because the other teacher unions were not part of it, the impact was not so great. And of course, that was a pretty low turnout, about a third of your members. So if you've only got, say, a third of your members turning out this time, and you're only one of several unions who are taking the action, is that really going to work?
There is a genuine sense across the public sector unions that public sector pay is being unfairly kept down and that this is having a poor effect on public services. We may be joined by PCS, there may be other unions in November, but the point for us is that this is part of the public sector pay campaign. It's part of speaking up for public services, which is firmly embedded in the TUC's campaign to say this country needs and actually can afford good public services for everyone.
Looking at some of the other issues that are very much at the forefront in education at the moment, what's your position on diplomas? Would you like to see them work? Would you like to see them replace A-levels and GCSEs as the original Tomlinson plan suggested?
We were very, very much in favour of the Tomlinson plan, and actually we were not alone. I mean, there was a very broad consensus again on Tomlinson, but there is always the issue that there is insufficient time before things come in. So we are reserving judgment at the moment, although in a general sense, diplomas are in the direction of what we would want to see. The problem is the agenda is if we have this, we get rid of the gold standard of A-levels and those kinds of things. What we really need is a proper and rigorous system of examining those things which are the kinds of subject areas and curricula which we think are appropriate.
I must just ask, because I ask everyone this, what do you think diplomas really are? Because it's trouble getting an answer. Are they vocational? Are they academic? Are they applied learning? No one really is able to give a very clear answer. What's your effort at it?
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that no one, when talking about, for example, medicine, would describe it as vocational. And yet, it must be vocational par excellence, mustn't it? So there's a kind of tendency to assume that vocational is about carpentry and everything else is academic. I think the diplomas are about trying to make sure that we have rigour in assessing those things which children and young people choose to do in the later stages of their secondary education.
Now, another thing I know that concerns the union is the government's national challenge schools, the picking out of that list of schools that are not getting, in their view, sufficient numbers of pupils through 5A to Cs. But aren't you in a dangerous position if you are seen to be defending schools that year after year are getting very, very low results?
No one would defend schools doing less than their very best by the children whom they teach. No one would defend that. But what we did say was that announcing 638 schools are failing doesn't help. Now, we welcome, of course, the fact that the government was prepared to put additional money into those schools. We do welcome that. But if you make an announcement like that and you name schools, the government knows that there is a journalistic approach to this which will say these schools are not doing what they should do.
Looking to the future now, I mean, can I ask you first of all, have you made a decision yet whether you would stand when there is the contest for General Secretary?
Well, it's obviously it's a difficulty for me, isn't it? Because clearly the important thing to do is to get on with the job and to make sure that that Steve's memory and his place in the union were properly recognised. I should just say that we were very pleased that the government announced the Steve Sinnot Fellowship. And that's, I would say it was generous, but actually I think it's wholly deserved. So obviously, it isn't something that I was able to think about, while we've been getting on with what we've been doing. It wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for me to declare a candidature on the air on Teachers TV with you, but obviously I have it under active consideration, and when the nomination process opens, I will obviously be writing to members.
Whether or not you are a candidate and whether or not you are leading the NUT in the future, clearly we're not that far off a general election. There could be a change of government. How easily do you think would the National Union of Teachers be able to work with, say, a David Cameron Conservative government?
We obviously maintain relationships with the three parties throughout the time when they're in opposition. So what we would have to do is engage constructively on the areas that we think are of importance to us and our members in the Education Service, and see what their education policies look like at the time. It's incumbent, I think, on all trade unions to try and work with and influence whichever party is in power.
They've made a big thing of what they call the supply side revolution, injecting an element of market forces into schools. Is that something that, if there were a Conservative government, you could foresee the NUT protesting against, campaigning against?
Well, we're not keen on the marketisation of education, as you won't be surprised. I mean, we're not keen on privatising public services. We're not keen on the market in education because we don't think it contributes anything positive. That's not to say that we don't want to work with business in certain constructive ways. It's perfectly reasonable for business to afford opportunities for people who are currently teaching to go and do secondments and see what the world looks like from a business perspective.
So whatever your role in the union in the future, it seems it would be pretty busy. Would you be happy? You've got that determination to carry on battling, even if it may mean less time for your other great favourite activity of gardening?
I do love gardening, actually, but because I live in London, I have a very small garden, so it doesn't have to take up an enormous amount of time. But yes, I have great enthusiasm, and I think I have the energy to make sure that the union keeps running all of the very important campaigns that we want to run.
Okay, Christine Blower, thank you very much.
Thank you.